Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to look ahead to some of the agreements we believe are going to be announced at the UK-EU summit tomorrow, a first step towards putting the UK back on the path to sanity, which the Sunday Mail are today calling a surrender summit. So what exactly do the Mail have against Britain's no longer having to use the queue for idiots on holiday and letting our farmers and fishermen sell their produce more easily? But first, for daily news and commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So the Mail on Sunday seemed to be in some distress today. So upset are they at the closer ties, which over 70% of the public want, that they've had to break out the emergency Meghan Merkle to calm themselves down. They're referring to the summit tomorrow as a surrender summit. In reality, the surrendering was done by the Mail and the government they were backing a few years ago. As a result of the Brexit they promoted, EU businesses can now export to Britain more easily than British businesses can to the EU. We surrendered tens of billions of pounds a year in trade. We had to install a trade border inside the UK, which did not exist before, and British citizens have to wait for hours in the idiot queue when going on holiday. But in reality, what are we expecting to be announced? What are we going to get? What are we going to give? Well, although the summit hasn't happened yet, and yes, as always, the haggling will continue right up until the 11th hour, most of the actual discussions have largely taken place and the main agreements have been widely reported. But it is worth bearing in mind, what are these agreements? We're not going to see Keir Starmer brandishing a big book of agreements with a signing session with von der Leyen. Most of what is announced tomorrow is effectively progress. It's things we've agreed that we're going to do, but the final details haven't been agreed yet. So it's not like it comes into force next week. We're going to be told of agreements which are going to happen, but have not yet been finalised. It's a little bit like when the government announced the building of the Universal Studios theme park. We don't have it yet, but we know we're getting it. So what do the reports say we're going to get? Well, first of all, we can do away with the idiot queues on holiday. When Brits holiday to the EU, they have to use the longer third country queues to get their passport stamped. The likes of the Mail have been raging at this indignity for years, but they're the ones who said we should become a third country. Hilariously, EU citizens do not get the same treatment when coming to Britain. So the situation right now is that because it turned out we needed them more than they needed us, not only can EU businesses export to Britain more easily than we can to the EU, but EU citizens can travel more easily into Britain than Britons can into the EU as well. I mean, that's what I call proper surrender monkeying, don't you? And we're likely to hear reports that British travellers will be able to use the e-gates properly with no need for stamps quite soon. So that's a balancing where we were underneath before. But that's just a basic starter. And that's also something the Tories tried to do under Sunak as well. The main event will be a security and defence pact. It will mean formal cooperation on joint military exercises, cybersecurity discussions, things like that. And, basically the areas where we shot ourselves in the foot when the Russian-funded and fuelled Boris Johnson decided to split up Europe's security strength just before a Russian invasion of Europe. The pact announced tomorrow, it's not going to be massive in itself. It's more of a statement of intent, but it represents cooperation where that cooperation had been split up a few years ago. It's not going to represent the big prize on offer, which is access to the EU Defence Fund that we're hoping to agree, but that is the direction of travel. The main sticking point at the moment on that is France. They're claiming that, look, this is EU funding, so it should be used for EU companies, which is fair enough, and a sentiment which would certainly be shared by Brexit supporting Mail readers. However, others in the EU are pointing out that actually in this particular case, it's not an economic stimulus fund. It's about making sure Europe can defend itself when its long-time ally is threatening to pull out at any moment and the continent is right now under active attack. Ramping up defence is the primary goal, and that's going to mean bringing the UK in close. The whole point is to try and avoid duplication where possible. See, one of Europe's defence failings, even if we spend the same amount of money as America, our defence wouldn't be as good because America has centralised planning for its defence needs. We don't. Individual countries do their own thing. So we've got loads of different models of things that do the same thing, whether it be from battleships to missiles or whatever, planes. We have multiple models that do the same thing. We need to make defence efficient in the same way EU made trade efficient. That will mean the UK playing a big part because we already have a well-established defence industry. So we are likely to be involved because most of the EU want it because they are focusing on the need to actually protect ourselves. But arguments to be had with France because, of course, they also have a very advanced defence sector and they would like to vacuum up most of those contracts. In fact, this appears to be, so on the Mail on Sunday, it's moaning about us having to give hundreds of millions of pounds in contribution. I think that's what they're talking about, which won't technically true because this agreement is not being announced tomorrow. But in general terms, like what sort of idiot argues against an entrance fee of a few hundred million in return to access to a 150 billion euro fund? Now, obviously, we're not going to be taking all of that 150 billion. But the UK has a strong defence sector, so we will definitely be coming away with way more than we put in, which will be good for jobs and tax revenues, as well as the main goal of strengthening Europe's defence. Seriously, what sort of idiot argues against that? Oh yeah, that's right, a Russian backing Brexit supporter. We're also likely to see something announced on Labour's coveted SPS agreement. Being outside the single market customs union, let's be clear, we cannot get rid of the paperwork needed for exports and imports, and that's a huge deal. But this agreement can lead to fewer checks taking place. That would not only allow farmers and fishermen to get fresh produce to Europe more quickly, meaning it can command a higher price, it gives us more capacity to make sure we're carrying out the safety checks properly and combat smuggling. See, the reason smuggling is absolutely rife in Brexit Britain is because we can't physically carry out all the import checks that we need without slowing freight down to a crawl and seeing empty shelves. So it was just considered easier to wave things through than to have empty shelves and look like Soviet Russia. We don't have the capacity to do the checks properly. This means smugglers dodge not only import duties, costing the Treasury a fortune, but also importing in dangerously unsafe food. Like, people go on about the chlorinated chicken and hormone-fed beef from America, but criminals are sending us way more dangerous food right now. And our authorities are just waving it through because they don't have the facilities to check without bringing that trade to a standstill. But if we can reduce the level of checks needed, remember, it doesn't mean the checks don't take place. It just means they sort of get spread around like when we were in the EU. But if we don't have to have those things take place at the border, we can focus on making sure we monitor compliance of other trade better. One thing which surprised me was the talk of mutual recognition of qualifications. Now, over the past few years, Labour have had three main aims for closer trade ties with the EU in the first instance. So the first was the agri-food agreement for fewer checks. The second was easier movement for musicians. And the third was mutual recognition of qualifications. Now, the last two seemed to be the least likely if we weren't prepared to accept freedom of movement. But it seems that there is actually going to be some positive news after all. I saw the BBC reporting that the EU will recognise UK professional qualifications, which is pretty big because that was actually one of their red lines. There's even supposed to be an easing of visa restrictions for UK musicians wanting to perform in the EU. We'll have to see the details of that. But that will be welcome news for the industry because they're now pissed off about two things, Brexit and AI copywriting. So if reports are correct, we should see announcements that indicate Labour will be getting at least progress on all of its main objectives. And in return for this, what are we going to give? The most famous is the Youth Mobility Scheme. However, although this is billed as a concession, it's ridiculous to characterise it as such. It will benefit the UK both economically and culturally as much as the EU. The only reason it's even been described as a concession is because British politics is so broken that it's only the EU right now that values economic and cultural progress. In fact, remember, we wouldn't be getting anywhere near as much positive news out this summit this week. Remember what I just said about, the qualifications things being a bit of a red line for the EU a few months ago. The reason why I think that has probably, I'm not involved, but I think that's probably changed is because we wouldn't be getting as much positive news here if it weren't for the sledgehammer that Trump took to the global economy. Some of the things Labour are getting agreements on would not have happened without way more commitment from us if it weren't for the EU having to face up to a weaker trade outlook and needing to break down barriers elsewhere with more urgency. The Youth Mobility Agreement is good for us. In fact, we're diluting the benefits by insisting on capped numbers and limited durations because, migration. Another concession is alignment on SPS standards. Oh, actually, I'm just going to go back. On that issue of migration, we want to limit the numbers on migration, right? It needn't affect net migration at all, because remember, it's a two-way process. So it needn't actually produce any boost to net migration. But anyway, next concession. Alignment on SPS standards and accepting that the European Court of Justice is the final arbiter on those standards. Now, is this a concession? Yes and no in this case. It is a concession in that we will be agreeing to standards that we will have little to no role in deciding. But that's because of Brexit. We used to decide those standards. This is one of the cruel jokes of Brexit. People were told to leave so that we could make our own laws. But we did make our own laws in the EU. We were making those laws. But since Brexit, British producers still follow EU rules, if they want to actually sell anything, that is. But nobody in Britain decides those rules anymore, nor does a British judge sit on the ECJ anymore. So it is a concession in that sense, more than worth it for the extra money farmers and fishermen will potentially be able to make. And they'd be able to make even more if we broke down even more trade barriers. Remember, the post-Brexit situation right now is British fishermen, for example, they are landing more fish. Oh, they're landing more fish, but they're getting less money for it. Now, what do people really want? What do fishermen really want? Do they want to land more fish and get paid less, or less fish and get paid more? But also, the British public want the high standards. All we're agreeing to here is to maintain standards with the EU. The British public want that. No one in Britain says we should have lower standards. So it's a concession that we don't decide those standards, but the public want those standards anyway. So even this isn't much of a concession. So I would argue we're not really giving anything away. Even if we eventually have to make concessions on access to British fishing waters, that is in return for British fishermen having better access to their customers on the continent. So they still win. You know, we can wait for the announcements. We can see how things develop over the next year or so, because remember, this is just the starting point. But from what I can tell, we're getting what we want. And even what we're giving in return is also in our favour. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.